And we are live. The Detroit Pistons lose a close one at home to the Houston Rockets after predominantly controlling the entirety of the game. They ultimately couldn't come out and close it in the final couple of minutes. Fred VanVleet, who is arguably the biggest free agent acquisition of the last offseason for the Houston Rockets, that and Dylan Brooks, who was not in the game tonight. However, Fred VanVleet very much made his presence known despite kind of having a relatively quiet game throughout the entirety of it. I mean, Detroit, all things considered, had one of their better performances of the season, which is why, it stings that much more to see it, go down into like another loss, especially when that's their 36th of the season, especially when you get that good of a performance with Cade Cunningham out of the line. Fred VanVleet had 20 points, but 8 of those points were down the stretch. He also had 12 assists. They showed a statistic where he and Tyrese Maxey are 2 of the 4 guards thus far in the last like 20 some years or in the history of the league to have 4,000 assists or to have like a 4 turnover ratio for like a say. Hey, I don't know what the I'm saying. The point is the guy doesn't turn the ball over, and he showed that off tonight. He also had some really clutch shots. All the credit in the world to him. But I mean, on top of that, for the Pistons, kind of the story of their season, it comes down to the things that are on the margins. I mean, Pistons lost by 2. They missed 6 free throws. You can't shoot 62% from the free throw line when you're trying to win in the NBA, especially when you only get 16 opportunities and you only make 10 of them. They went 12 of 35 from 3. They did shoot better than Houston tonight, who, did struggle all things considered. I mean, Jalen Green did not have his greatest performance. He had 28 points on 25 shots. Predominantly, a lot of his offense really came from getting to the free throw line and getting a lot of his opportunities that way. But all things considered, like the Pistons actually had a lot of really good contributions across the board tonight. I mean, Isaiah Stewart came back, and this was his first game, in the rotation since being out with that toe injury, and he looked like he didn't really miss any time at all. In fact, like his jump shot actually was looking really good. He had good overall touch. He actually scored from like all 3 levels tonight, which is like, oh, hey, Isaiah Stewart, where's this guy been? That's pretty cool. Definitely can't say that he doesn't have a positive impact on the team when he's on the court. I mean, the guy could play basketball. Jalen Duren overall had a really good night, but crucially made some pretty big mistakes down the stretch, namely that drive early in the shot clock when Detroit was up by 2, when they could have made it a 2 possession game, but instead Duren makes that drive, ultimately misses. Fred VanVleet brings it back down the court, hits the 3, Houston gets the lead, rest is history, boom goes the dynamite. And it's just a shame because it wastes a lot of good performances. Another guy, who came in and has been playing really well for this team all season, man, is Kevin Knox. It's surprising that he wasn't on an NBA roster at the beginning of this season, that he was someone that was just available as a free agent. Obviously, he had his stint previously last year in Detroit for about the first half of the season before he was ultimately traded to Portland. But he's really maximized this opportunity this time around. And, there's been a lot of chatter. I saw Kuka Hill talk about, should he be in the NBA like beyond this season? I think the answer is like absolutely, especially if he continues to show this improvement, like with his shooting touch. I mean, he was shoot 2 for 4 from 3 tonight. He was 7 of 9 from the field overall. When Kevin Knox is confident, scoring from the field, and that's very much his job when he is on the court, is to create offense for this team. He does it at a pretty good level. And, overall, like you have to be pretty impressed with what you saw. Jaden Ivey, again, like he didn't shoot the greatest from the field tonight, like struggled from beyond the arc, but there's a lot to like about his game, especially his aggression, his driving to the lane, that ferocious dunk that he had on Alperen Sengun. But on top of that, his 18 points, his 8 assists, how effective he was as a primary ball handler tonight. Another guy who was really effective with the ball in his hands tonight as well was Marcus Sasser. He came in, he had 7 assists of his own. He didn't score, but he was really effective at running the offense. I mean, he actually came in and like as far as like setting the table, especially for like a rookie guard, I'd say that's about as good as you can do in that situation, all things considered. And it's going to be interesting to see how that develops. I mean, Asar Thompson, Would still love to see him get more than 18 minutes, but in those 18 minutes, he was really effective. In particular, looked really good in the pick and roll with Marcus Sasser. That's really where, Asar did a lot of his work offensively and made some plays defensively tonight as well, even though it doesn't quite show up box score. He still was, pretty effective when he's on the court, and they still need to find ways, to get him more minutes as well. And you look at the box score and it's like, yeah, like Detroit, they need to be better with turning the ball over. They only had 13 tonight, but the turnovers that they had, they were costly ones. You look at the margin and you look at where this team needs to get better again. It needs to be at the free throw line. One major area that, that is something that's noticeable with Jaden Ivey's game in particular is his struggles at the free throw line. I mean, Jaden Ivey was 1 of 4 from the free throw line tonight. I mean, you talk about the thin margin of error here. I mean, they lost by 2 points. That's 3 points they can get back right there, right? Those are the little minutia, minor differences when it comes to winning an NBA basketball game. Making your free throws is a pretty major one because they call it the charity strike for a reason. Maurice, that is exactly the way to put it. And I think that's the way that the season is ultimately going to be remembered at the end. And I mean, that's the tough thing. You talk about, I mean, basketball, it's a game of inches, the thin margin. We were a rim out away from talking about a Pistons win, an insane game winner, how they almost fumbled the win at the end, but overall they controlled the vast majority of this game, which they did. But again, when you come out and you make those minor mistakes, you fumble it in those last couple of minutes, you know, that's what happens. And that the Pistons showed their youth in the final couple of minutes. And listen, I know people don't want to say it, especially because all the comparisons that we've had between the two franchises, but like you got to give the Rockets their credit, man. They have a lot to be excited about as far as, the future of their franchise. I mean, Alperen Sengun is sensational. He had 29 points, 12 of 19 from the field. His touch around the rim is insane. I thought Jalen Duren played him relatively well as he probably can, honestly. But in the same light, I mean, Sengun, he looks like a mixture of like a Jokic and Dirk Nowitzki to me. I mean, he's got that touch around the rim like Jokic and has that, ability to play make, but also that difficulty to move him from his spots. But he also kind of has that funkiness in his game of Dirk, where he can kind of have those leaner, like fadeaway shots. He can kind of have those leaners by the basket. He has like a unique ability to his game. So the baby Jokic comparisons are definitely appropriate, but I mean, he's also looking like his own man too. And I'm excited to see, like the progression to where Alperen Sengun could ultimately take, the progression of his game, because there's really a lot to like there. But I get it, man. I mean, yeah, we're bad, I get making it mad. Can't win it. Just win another game. We need to make a move at the trade deadline. I totally agree with you. And I think the Pistons agree as well. I think they have been active in trying to make moves, trying to make phone calls, trying to get in contact with other teams and who's available. And I think what you've been seeing over the last couple of days is you've been seeing a lot of teams starting to show interest in making trades and starting to discuss the players that are going to be on the market and going to be available. Looks like Brooklyn's going to have multiple players that are available from everything I've heard regarding, the Atlanta Hawks, and from everything we're seeing with reports, it looks like DeJounte Murray's definitely available. It looks like a lot of players in Atlanta are going to be available for trade. They're definitely going to be making some form of move. And tonight they weren't looking so great either. So I'm definitely not super optimistic about their overall direction. I mean, looking at Atlanta tonight, yeah, they lost by 18 at home to the Pacers. So vibes are not exactly great in Atlanta either. The Knicks, I saw a report earlier today that Detroit was potentially in heavy trade talks with the Knicks, which if that's the case, that would be interesting if the Pistons could possibly get their pick back in a Bojan trade or get some more assets to possibly use in order to, possibly get more assets, possibly, get a guy like Evan Fournier, who's like an expiring contract, who can maybe come in and be a shooting presence for you. That's something that maybe makes some form of sense. But again, Chuck says it takes two teams to trade. The 15th, everybody's available. That is correct. So The December 15th was when the vast majority of contracts that were signed through the offseason were available to be traded. But the January 15th deadline is when the rest of those contracts are available to be traded as well. But on top of that, teams really like to take their sweet time and they like to move really up till that deadline of February 8th. I'm not saying it's going to be until then till the Pistons make a trade, but I definitely think now, especially to Chuck's point, after that 15th deadline, is when you're going to see more action, going to see more discussion because things are going to be more open and available. And again, like the reason why it's taken until now, especially with how many teams are competitive, how many teams are, unlike the Pistons, winning games right now. Like you have a lot of teams that, especially like January, is really when you get through that first initial lull of the season. In particular, here for this season, you're done with the in-season tournament. You get through the holidays. You're about halfway through the season right now. Like teams are getting about to the 40-41 game mark in an 82 game season. So you're about halfway. You're just about getting to the point where you have a pretty good idea of who you are and what your team has become. And I mean, let's be honest, the Pistons have realized that through the first 37 or 38 games, they have been the worst team in the history of basketball. Statistically, that is what it shows. And so obviously they're going to be the first team that wants to make a move. But teams like Brooklyn, teams like Atlanta that are kind of in that mix to be in the play-in tournament that could potentially, justify that they could maybe make a play, to be in the playoffs because, here's what every play-in team is going to be doing now for the next few years, just to let you know, because the Miami Heat went and made that miracle run to the finals. Even the Bulls tried to trick themselves over this offseason saying, oh, well, we just saw the Miami Heat go make the finals run. Maybe we were one play away from doing it. No, you weren't, but keep telling yourself that. Anyway, a lot of teams are going to maybe be telling themselves that as well. The Brooklyn Nets are definitely a team, after the, pathetic display that they showed against the Pistons in the midst of their long losing streak where they, played the Pistons like it was a playoff game. And then the next night, load managed against the Milwaukee Bucks at home. Ever since that incident, they've kind of fallen apart. The Atlanta Hawks have really fallen apart. The Raptors are finally starting to make a decision on what direction they're ultimately going to want to go. Washington still has pieces that they could trade as well. The Warriors are a team that are starting to really figure out who they are, all of the trials and tribulations they're going in, not just the Draymond situation, but the Jonathan Kuminga and the Moses Moody dynamic that's going on there. Portland is really starting to fall apart over the last couple of days. I mean, they literally just lost by 60 to the 76ers last night. And Scoot Henderson had like the lowest plus minus in a game in the history of the league, which, listen, I still believe in Scoot Henderson, but I feel for Chauncey on that one. That has to be difficult. And I saw, as of right now, they're playing, I believe that they're playing right now. Oh, man, they're down by 32 to the Minnesota Timberwolves. So not great couple nights if you're a Portland Trailblazers fan. It's been a rough year if you're a Pistons fan, but tonight it could be worse. It could be worse. But nonetheless, all that to say, I think the field of who's going to want to make moves is becoming much more clear. And in addition, you're starting to see, especially, I think this is going to be one of the more active deadlines that we've seen in the last couple of years because of the fact that you're seeing so many teams reportedly starting to have interest in making moves. I think you saw over the last couple of years, outside of some, pretty hallmark moves, featuring like James Harden a couple of years ago. And then, last year, I forgot what the big move at the deadline was, but Kevin Durant, duh. But, overall, like this year, I don't know if you're going to see like the blockbuster of that ilk of player being traded. I mean, you can definitely see Pascal Siakam, DeJounte Murray seems like he's going to be traded. So there's definitely going to be big names that are moved. But at the same time, I still think that there's a lot to like. Ouch. Post-game questions about Ivy. Chuck, could you clarify on what that means? Um, I'm going to see what he's trying to say here, but I'm not seeing anything as the and it looks like Monty Williams on Ivy as the lead ball handler. If I give him a small package to utilize as lead ball handler, I think he can grow in that environment. So, I mean, there that's definitely fair. There's definitely a lot to say as far as, like, his ability to grow. But ultimately, at the same time, I do think there's a lot to like well with what he did. I think the biggest thing with Jaden Ivey's game is he does play with, like, an elite level of speed, but at the same time, Williams said there was a big organizational meeting yesterday, and one thing that was pointed out to Williams was Ivy as a lead ball handler hasn't had much, and that is true. That is absolutely right, and I think, when you look at one thing that the Pistons do actually that the Pistons do have to look at is how they can more dynamically utilize Aden Ivey alongside Cade Cunningham. And, absolutely, like, and you know what? Props for Monty to openly admitting this and openly, like, taking the claim to say, "Hey, that's on me. I have to eat it. I have to be better in that department." And I think you're seeing when Jaden Ivey does have the ball in his hands, when he does have the opportunity to be the primary ball handler, I think the team is better for it. And I think one thing that you can do, I know, Eddie says Jaden Ivey should be starting over Killian. Jaden Ivey, he did start alongside Killian. But to your point, Eddie, I do think that especially when you're looking at a lot of those units where Killian Hayes is running like the second unit, offensively, I think there's a lot of opportunity for Jaden Ivey to be the primary ball handler with the second unit, to have more opportunity, to initiate more offense for himself if Cade's on the bench. I really think that, that is something that is a big opportunity because a lot of times you find that when that bench unit is out there, you find that Ivy really is with the starters. But I think ultimately, like, if you allow him to be that primary ball handler with the secondary unit, I think that's something that could be super beneficial. I also think if you do move on from Killian, that would allow you to play more with Asar as the primary ball handler with that second unit as well, which I potentially think could be pretty beneficial too to switch him both. I think Asar is a guy that can play both as the initiator and the roll man as far as the pick and roll goes. And so, to be able to utilize more of that and to put him in more situations where you can utilize his playmaking, but also to surround him more with shooting so that he doesn't have to be put in more uncomfortable situations is something I think would help him as well. Listen, I think Killian overall, like, what relatively had one of his better games, tonight. But at the same light, I think generally we know who Killian Hayes is at this point, and I'm not sure if there is going to be a move made at the deadline. I know that he did say a few days ago that he would love to be in Detroit, and I'm sure that there would realistically be a really affordable contract to be able to bring him back on. But with the deadline looming, but on top of that, supposedly with the return of Monte Morris looming as well, coming back to the rotation, that kind of makes you question where, where Killian Hayes' role is ultimately going to be and, who's really going to be here, beyond then as well. A guy that did get some minutes tonight that definitely was welcomed and, showed perhaps why he should be getting more of those minutes in the first place was Marvin Bagley. Obviously, with Isaiah Stewart back in the lineup, they were allowed to play more with Isaiah Stewart as a big, as kind of the secondary big, which allowed them to bring in Marvin Bagley big off the bench, not necessarily have to be that defensive big for them, but to really utilize his strength on the offensive end. And I mean, in 12 minutes, Marvin Bagley definitely was more steady than James Wiseman has been at that spot. Obviously, James Wiseman tonight got his first ENT in a while. They experimented with him being in the rotation, and even though there were some moments where he was actually playing not too bad of basketball, he had some stretches where he was starting to improve. I do ultimately think that it was something that they were just not good enough for him on the court to justify, him continuing to have that spot. So ultimately, obviously this is going to be a game that's really difficult, and especially you look at a team that's now 3-37. They have had a really difficult time with winning games this season, and when they have had good performances, having a difficult time with actually closing out and maximizing those performances. And with kind of tonight being one of those things where it just kind of happens again. It's just unfortunate. But at the same time, I still think that, with guys, you look at the silver linings and they still are, the likes of Jaden Ivey and when Cade Cunningham gets back, Cade as well. Jalen Duren, overall, I still think he had a really good game tonight. But again, those mistakes, those mental errors down the stretch were definitely, were definitely a thing. Audio issues. Oh, never mind. I'm good. Okay. Sengun is nice. He flat out is, man. I mean, he can really play. His improvement over the last couple of years has been remarkable. I still think that he can kind of be a little bit full. I still think he can flop a little bit too much for my liking. I mean, maybe that's just me kind of being nitpicky here, but in the same light, I mean, he's definitely improved significantly on the defensive end. The Rockets are definitely more dynamic when they run the offense through him. But at the same time, like I have nothing but like positive things to say about Alperen Sengun's development. I'm really excited to see, what direction he can take it. Monty Morris for a vet point guard all season would have helped so far greatly too. The vets that were supposed to help this team have been a total failure this year, 100%. I was really hoping that Joe Harris was going to be someone that could at least get some consistent minutes and be like a reliable shot maker for them. I think Bojan in the minutes that he's actually played has been really good. But I was actually doing a pod earlier today with Bryce Simon, which I'm actually going to release over the weekend, where we talked about, some of this as well. And it's like Bojan's playing really well, but it's just, a lot of guys are being asked to play roles that they just shouldn't necessarily being asked to play at this point in their careers. I mean, Bojan is 35 years old. So to go and have to, a lot of times defend some of their best wings and, have to not make many errors in order to keep the Pistons in games. Also, either, primary, secondary, or tertiary option on the offensive end as well. For a 35-year-old guy with limited athleticism, that's a pretty difficult role for him to play. So, that's where you wonder what type of moves they can maybe address at the trade deadline. I personally, names that I'm curious to see if they're going to go after. I mean, knowing the moves that Troy Weaver's made in the past, part of you wonders if he's going to go to a Golden State and look at a Jonathan Kuminga, an Andrew Wiggins, or a Moses Moody. But at the same time, you also wonder if, they're just going to steer clear of some of those players that could be associated with the type of a reclamation project that the Pistons have had in the past, especially if you look at the fact that, the Pistons need proven players who can come in and help them win now. And as good as Jonathan Kuminga can be, as much of an upside as he has with his athleticism, I just don't know if that's ultimately the direction they should. Now, Moses Moody, a guy who can, hit shots and play on the defensive side of the ball, wouldn't necessarily be super expensive to keep. I mean, that might be an interesting avenue to go down as well. But at the same time, I mean, there's definitely options. I know one thing for sure. I would definitely not want Andrew Wiggins just because a unmotivated Andrew Wiggins is not a player that you want under your books, especially with the contract that he has currently. And I just don't know if we're going to be seeing that same Andrew Wiggins that won an NBA championship again, especially if you think about the fact that he was doing that in a contract year. And I don't know what happened to Andrew Wiggins. There was that pretty significant absence that he had last season. And I hope he's okay. I hope whatever happened with his family, I hope all is well. But he just has not been the same player ever since he's come back from that. I definitely don't foresee the Pistons going after a Klay Thompson. I don't foresee a Draymond Green. I don't think that makes sense either. And even then, I don't think Draymond Green has much of any trade value right now in the first place. I know Pascal Siakam is a guy that continues to be in conversations for the Pistons. I know it's someone that they're interested in going after in the off season, but I personally would question the risk of trading young assets for a player that could potentially walk in the off season at the risk of giving up young players that could potentially really help you down the road. And I know that the core hasn't fit together right now. I know they're eventually going to have to split it up at some point. It's just the question of, is that the move? Is that the place to make it? I saw the Hoops Hype podcast with the Hoops Hype podcast with Bobby Marks, and I forgot who the senior insider is over at Hoops Hype. I saw they called that the Blake Griffin 2.0 contract, which I absolutely can't disagree with. And Chuck, I mean, I guess we did fix San Antonio, but at the same time, they are also going up against the Charlotte Hornets. So do with that with what you will. And Eddie said, I agree. Tonight made me realize how decent the Pistons can be defensively without giving Bojan so many minutes. I also think tonight shows you like how good they can be defensively if Jalen Duren and Isaiah Stewart are both playing to their potential on that end as well. Like when the Pistons were playing their best basketball, it was when Jalen Duren was dominating at the beginning of this season. It was when he was looking like a little Bam Adebayo at the start of the year. And I really think, for this team to take a next step, I think a lot of it can come from his development on that end. Now, obviously, Jalen Duren's missed a good amount of this season, about a third to almost half of the games that the Pistons have had thus far. He's only 20 years old. Obviously, you expect him to develop and to be able to get to that point, and it's unrealistic to ask a 20-year-old to be Bam Adebayo right away. But in the same light, I mean, the talent is there. Also, his finishing ability and the things that he's been doing with more of the touches on the offensive side of the ball, it just makes me excited for what his future is. But ultimately, if the Pistons want to get to where they need to get to, he needs to get back to that guy on the defensive end. He needs to become that player on the defensive end. And I really think Jalen Duren is going to be that type of guy. I still have a ton of confidence in him. And even if he can have like another big next to him, like I know people, watch the Wemby game and think about like what it could have been with having him in Detroit. But man, even having a Jabari Smith Jr. next to Jalen Duren would be huge. Even having, oh my goodness, Chet Holmgren with Jalen Duren in the front court would be a atrocity for the rest of the league. They would be absolutely screwed. But I mean, that's why you see the vision of getting a Pascal Siakam type next to Jalen Duren, because that could do some damage in the front court. That makes Giannis not very excited to drive down the paint in Detroit. And ultimately, I still think, obviously change is going to be coming at some point, and the pressure is going to be on for Troy Weaver to make those moves without making too many sacrifices because of the talent that they have. But in the same light, we still have a couple of weeks till that happens. In the meantime, on Sunday, we have the big game at home in Ford Field. First playoff game in Ford Field history. Lions versus Rams. Go Lions. I'm gonna pretend this is a Jameson Williams jersey. I need to get the tape and ultimately transform this into a Jameson Williams jersey. Especially, I people saw my whole tirade on Twitter of, oh, don't boo Matthew Stafford, and then Kelly Stafford opened her mouth. Now I'm kind of more okay. It's like, Lions fans, do what you got to do. Especially during the game, free reign, absolutely. But folks, thank you so much for coming as always, talking basketball. Tomorrow, I think I'm going to release that podcast with Bryce Simon. We talked, quite a bit about what has gone wrong for the Pistons on the basketball side, schematically, things that they can be doing better, adjustments that they can make. But on top of that, what we'd like to see them address at the trade deadline. What is disjointed about the roster currently? We have, tough conversations about Monty Williams, Troy Weaver, and more. So love Bryce Simon of Motor City Hoops. Shout out to Omari Sankofa as well. Got to talk to both of the guys for the Pistons Pulse podcast this week. That was an absolute blast. And I'm telling you, man, more content is going to be coming. I promise you that. I just, I've been missing really getting back to doing content. And at this point, I'm just going to turn on the mic and just, so we're here, man. With that, thank you so much for listening. Be sure you're subscribed for more Pistons and NBA content. We'll catch you guys next time from Half Court. Be sure you're subscribed.